In early 1984, Apple released an ad which is widely regarded as one of the greatest ads ever made.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives.
Advertising Age and TV Guide ranked it as the best commercial of all time. Immediately following the ad's airing, Apple reportedly sold a record $3.5 million worth of Macintosh computers, and they sold out within weeks. But the success of this ad was genuinely a surprise because just 12 months earlier, Apple created a very similar ad, also with a similar Hollywood director and a similar sized budget. But that ad failed. So why did one ad fail and the other succeed?
I was sort of slightly nervous about talking about Apple in a book about business storytelling because everybody talks about Apple. But then I realised that not talking about Apple is like not talking about Shakespeare in a book about conventional storytelling. Like the Steve Jobs era of Apple was like the greatest ever period of business storytelling. It was, he had a masterful instinct for this stuff.
That's the award-winning author of the best-selling books, The Science of Storytelling and The Status Game.
My name is Will Storr. I'm a former journalist and author who has a specialist interest in the science of storytelling.
Specifically, storytelling in ads. Ads like 1984.
I suspect that the advert that you know about is 1984 because everybody knows that ad, the first Mac ad, which was extraordinarily successful. And what I didn't realise before I'd done my research was that it also sold huge volumes of computers that they couldn't supply enough computers to fill the demand. But what I didn't realise, and I think what other people didn't realise, is that the year before that very famous 1984 Mac ad, they also tried to do a business storytelling solution to sell the forerunner to the Mac, which was the Lisa. So kind of similar computer, even more expensive than the Mac, but revolutionary, a genuinely revolutionary device in that it was the first personal computer to have a mouse, windows, expandable menus, all the stuff that we take for granted these days.
That was a great presentation you made in there.
Do you know, I put together that entire project, including the presentation slides, just this morning.
Had your whole department working on it, huh?
No, I used my new Lisa personal computer.
A personal computer did all of that?
That's right.
Incredible.
The Lisa computer is incredible. In just a few moments, it helped me adjust a schedule chart, update an entire budget, write a memo, develop some graphics, and create a distribution list.
And so they thought, how are we going to promote this thing? Well, we're going to tell a story. We're going to use storytelling. So they got their, very flash ad agency, Chiat Day. They got a Hollywood director, Adrian Lin, most famous for Flashdance, to make a film with Kevin Costner. And the film is called Breakfast. The actor's called Breakfast. And it's a beautifully shot thing. The sun's coming up. There's Kevin Costner riding his bike. It does feel very Flashdance. With lots of beautiful music. And he does all this computer work. He's got a little dog with him. And then the phone rings.
There'll be just two kinds of people.
Hi. He tells his wife he's going to be back soon for breakfast.
Yeah, I'll be home for breakfast.
And, I think the idea being that this guy's a super hard worker, and in order to be a super successful, hard, handsome worker, you need a Mac. It was a total disaster, that ad campaign. Nobody remembers it today. It's completely lost at the rabbit hole of history. The other thing, the other ads for it were just big ads in the New York Times, etc., just listing there weren't even stories, they were just listing all the benefits of the Lisa.
Spreadsheet modeling, charts and graphs, list management, text processing, project management, and presentation graphics.
And then the next year, they had this computer, the Mac. They didn't even really know what it was going to be yet because they hadn't really finished inventing it when they launched this ad at the Super Bowl. But it was the same thing. It was the same ad agency. They used a Hollywood director, and this time Ridley Scott, to tell the story. And this very famous example, it shows this kind of totalitarian hellscape.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of
this sort of barking, hectoring, kind of patriarchal leader in control of these kind of grey drone people. And through the middle of this horrible, sort of depressing scene comes this amazing, empowered, multicoloured, woman with this sort of lovely apple top on with a hammer, and she smashes the hammer through the horrible totalitarian man.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And this ad was incredibly successful, like just enormously successful. Like it was immediately what we would call today viral. Like the evening after it was broadcast, news stations across America were making news stories about this incredible advert, and it's still considered one of the greatest kind of ads ever made. And indeed, one expert that I read and quoted in the book, and I agree with him, says it didn't just redefine Apple, it redefined how we see personal computers into the Silicon Valley social media age. We now see personal computers as this kind of individualistic, creative thing that people use to make their own lives better. In the book, I asked, why did the one ad work and not the other ad? One of the fundamental things that they got wrong with Breakfast was it wasn't telling a story. It thought it was telling a story because it was by Adrian Lin and had Kevin Costner in it doing some stuff, but it wasn't telling a story. One of the most fundamental properties of a story is that it describes the overcoming of an obstacle in pursuit of a goal. Like if you don't have a character or characters overcoming an obstacle in pursuit of a goal, you don't have a story. You just have, I don't know, an event, or something, or a scene. So without those elements, there's no drama, there's no emotion, there's nothing to stick in your head, there's no one to care about. It was just a man on a phone telling his wife he's going to come home from breakfast. It was rubbish. So that's the most fundamental thing. But also there was nothing for people to identify with. They thought that by giving him a dog, that's actually what they thought. I found this interview with the guy who made it. So by giving him a dog, you were going to identify him because people like people with dogs, which is crazy. But the 1994 ad really did strike a chord with people at the time. So and to understand quite how, you've got to go back to the 1980s, and this is the era in which Silicon Valley wasn't the home of these kind of like flashy domestic products like Facebook and Google and Apple and all these, Microsoft isn't Silicon Valley, is it? But LinkedIn, all these other Silicon Valley companies. It was the home of the military industrial complex. So people were scared of computers. They thought that computers were going to be something that were going to maybe take over the world one day, or lead us genuinely into a totalitarian future. This was before the Berlin Wall had come down. People were still scared of the communist menace. A huge film would have been 2001: A Space Odyssey, which showed a computer taking over a spaceship and killing everybody on board it. The year before that ad, there'd been War Games, a massive Hollywood blockbuster, which showed a big mainframe computer almost starting World War III with Soviet Union and destroying the world. So that's what people thought about computers. And so Apple was saying in that story, we see your concerns, we reflect your concerns, but with that, if you put your support behind Apple, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be freedom and creativity and individuality and progress. So it was a really powerful set of ideas that they were directly tapping into. And I think that those are the two reasons, I think, why it was so successful. One is that it was actually a story, and two, it was a story that people could strongly identify with.
Stories change our perception, and there's a great study that backs up Will's point. In 2013, several researchers asked 120 participants to view paintings by cubist artists like Pablo Picasso, George Braque, and Fernand Léger. The researchers recorded people's reactions to the paintings alone, and their first reactions weren't great. Cubist paintings don't exactly grip the average person, but then the scientists included the backstories behind the painting's meaning. They gave a brief history of the painters themselves, and with these backstories, the audience ratings of the paintings improved dramatically. These abstract works suddenly took on a whole new meaning, and the viewers enjoyed the paintings far, far more. Stories boost our enjoyment, but also our willingness to spend. In 2009, researchers Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn created the Significant Objects Project, an experiment that aimed to quantify the impact of storytelling for everyday items. The researchers purchased inexpensive items from thrift stores and garage sales, spending a total of $128. Next, they commissioned professional writers to create fictional stories about each object. These items, along with their new fictional stories, were listed on eBay, but with a clear disclaimer that stated that the narratives were fictional. Despite telling buyers that the backstories were made up, they sold the objects for a combined total of $3,612, a profit of almost $3,500. A ceramic horse purchased for just 99 cents sold for $62 after being paired with a compelling story, and a pink plastic horse bought for $1 sold for $104 when accompanied with a backstory. We have what behavioral scientists call a story bias. But why?
And in a nutshell, if I can quickly talk through the entire history of life on Earth. if you trace your family tree back 3.8 billion years, you're going to find a single cell bacteria. Like a single cell bacteria is the earliest form of life on Earth. It's where we all come from. And a single cell bacteria is this little machine for overcoming obstacles in pursuit of goals. That's what it does, and it's very good at doing that. But its behavior is reflexive, so it's algorithmic. It's very rigid. It's basically, if the conditions outside my cell are X, I'm going to do Y. If they're A, I'm going to do B. So that can be very effective. But the problem with that is that it's just not very good for coping with environments that are unpredictable. And of course, most environments are unpredictable. So then, hundreds of millions of years after coming up with this reflexive technology, evolution comes up with a new technology to help living organisms overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals. And that new technology is the feeling emotion system, feelings and emotions. And so feelings are amazing because they don't instruct their owner what to do. They just advise their owner what to do. So if you're a mouse in an alleyway, and someone's left half a Greggs sausage roll across the alleyway, your feeling of hunger is going to draw you towards the sausage roll. But then you see a cat, on a roof staring at you, and then you've got a new emotion, which is fear. And so, by measuring those emotions, fear versus hunger, you can make a decision. You're not slave to your kind of algorithm. So, incredibly successful technology. Obviously, the feeling emotion system. Animals have this, and insects to some limited degree have this. Although insects are also quite algorithmic. And then between 50 and 100,000 years ago, evolution comes up with a brand new technology to facilitate the overcoming of obstacles in pursuit of goals. And that's story. And, humans remain the only animal to have the ability to use storytelling. And it's really the secret of our success. Humans, we're one of 5 existing species of great ape. But we're obviously different to our ape relatives, and the difference is that we've become part ape, part ant. That we overcome the obstacles in pursuit of goals, partly like apes, so partly in the form of ant-like superorganisms. And what would be my superorganism is the organism itself is the thing that solves problems and deals with problems, and it's made up of numerous humans, and each human is playing its individual role, knows what it has to do in order to help the superorganism win. And that's all of human life. That's a company, that's a political party, that's a cult, that's a religion, that's a football team. That's what we do as humans. We solve the problems of existence cooperatively. We would die in days if we were the only person left on Earth, because we wouldn't be able to support ourselves. How does that work? How do you get all of our all of our ape ancestors solve their problems as individuals. So how do you get individual great ape brains to fuse together, to come together and all work together in the form of this superorganism? And the answer is with story. That's what story does. A story kind of takes over your mind. It tells you a story about tomorrow, the thing that we're trying to achieve. It tells you how we're going to get there, what you've got to do to achieve it, and it tells you who you've got to be in order to achieve that thing. So that's what story is. It's a device for fusing lots and lots of human brains together in order that we, achieve goals. I mean, one of the most sort of fundamental ways of thinking about this is that there's a very famous evolutionary biologist called Michael Tomasello, who once wrote that it's impossible to imagine 2 chimpanzees picking up a log together and carrying it to another place in order to build something. Even that basic level of cooperation would never happen with a chimpanzee, our closest relative. Whereas, of course, that's very basic to humans. But in order to do that, you've got to tell a story about the future. Hey, dude, if we pick up this log and we get a few logs and we chuck them over there, that might make a nice base for a camp, or whatever it might be. That's a story about the future. So that's how it works. And as I say in the book, you can feel that happening whenever you go to the cinema. When you go to the cinema, 200 individuals will sit down in front of a screen. And then if the film is any good, for the 90 minutes, 2 hours of the film, their consciousness vanishes of their own life, and they all experience the consciousness of the film, of the story, and experience the ups and downs and fortunes and misfortunes of the characters on the screen. So they become as one in that cinema, and that story, working as it's supposed to. That's what it's supposed to do. It takes over our brains, and replaces our individual consciousness with the group consciousness. And that's how a religion works, that's how a cult works, that's how a political party works. We absorb the story of the group and become a member of that group that's sort of existing at the center of its story.
Apple's 1984 ad is widely regarded as one of the best ads of all time. The 1983 ad is almost entirely forgotten. Both had Hollywood directors, huge production costs, and prominent ad placements, but it was the story that made the difference. Stories bind us together. They make us spend more on random eBay items. They make us appreciate Picasso's more. The 1984 ad helped turn Apple from a struggling, relatively unknown Silicon Valley tech company into one of the most successful companies in the world. And that wouldn't have happened if Apple hadn't understood the power of a good story. Will and I didn't finish our discussion there. In fact, we went on to record a bonus episode. We spoke about why we love the underdog, why we despise high-status people, and the incredibly simple trick charity fundraisers use to make you donate. To listen, click the link in the description, enter your email, and you'll be taken straight to the bonus episode. It's that simple. That's all for now. I do hope you go and tune in to that bonus episode. Cheers.